Not real common. I mean, 7 to 10 out of 100,000, but I mean, if you're in that family, and that doesn't matter how common it is, you have it. The majority will come up somewhere in their mid-30s that you'll start seeing symptoms that are come through. If they've never seen it before, if this is a sporadic mutation, or if they know but they're not going to admit it, you can start first seeing a lot of the symptoms at this age, and that's a good time to see some of these symptoms so that you can try to get some of the treatments started so that we can kind of help slow the progression of this and make sure that things are going okay. Death from these patients are typically somewhere around 20 years. It's getting a little longer now with regards to what's going on, but the profound dementia is really kind of unbelievable that you see in these patients. So from that standpoint, I don't know if it's really doing us any good by keeping these patients being able to live longer because of their social limitations and the social stuff that they go through with regards to the disease. We talked a little bit about the Westphal variant. That's onset at less than 20. It is fast and furious and ugly. These are the people that have more than 60 repeats. They usually fall in the line of, the studies are very different, but for the longest time what they thought was that the longer that the genetic linkage went, the more CAG repeats that you would get. So, if grandpa had it and he had, 41, dad may have 45 and you may have 47, kind of thing. And that's kind of initially where it started, but it's not really proven out to be that much anymore. It's just kind of, luck of the draw on how many repeats that you have and what's going on. But some of these that you get in, you may get a dad in that's maybe 50, 55, and they have, a 20-year-old or even younger than that. You get somebody in that's in their 40s and they've got teenagers at home. Sitting down and counseling these patients and trying to determine, what kids do we test, what kids do we not test, do we test the kids at all, what age do we test them at, can be pretty tricky with regards, but the most important thing is that, if you miss that one test of the kid who now has, 66 repeats, and they're going to have the disease at age 18, it's not fun. I mean, that's something that you probably want to know beforehand to see what's going on. Triad symptoms, this will be on board, or at least it has been on mine. I got to recert next year. Behavioral, cognitive, motor. Those are the ones that you'll see early on. You'll see behaviorally, irritability. These patients are, it is your bad driver to the hill. Anything just sets them off. And when it sets them off, they can be extremely cruel, mean, high rate of divorce in these patients that don't, either one, who don't know what they have and the spouse is just like, I'm out of here, or two, know what they have and the spouse just says, I can't deal with it anymore. So extremely high rate of divorce, extremely high rate of job loss. They can't hold anything down. It just, they fly off the handle at every little small thing that occurs from there. A lot of them will commit suicide at diagnosis. I mean, it's just they know what their life's going to be. They saw their grandfather go through it, and they ain't going through it. So suicide is really high in these patients. Prison is really high. These people are totally impulsive and will just fly off at the handle at anything. And next thing you know, that they're in jail. Cognitively, initially kind of hard to characterize as much as kind of the behavioral end of it, because a lot of them will try to hide a lot of this. All of a sudden now they can't balance a checkbook. They can't stick to a schedule unless it's like really written down with the alerts in their phone that's banging them and telling them, I've got to be here right now. They can't concentrate, they can't plan, they can't do those type of things. And that's kind of hard for a medical provider to really kind of fall into initially, because chances are the patients aren't going to tell you that that's occurring. They're not going to tell you that, you know, they've overdrawn their checking account for the last 5 or 6 months because they can't keep up with what's going on. But later it does go into some profound dementia. So these patients, it takes a while, but dementia is definitely there. Motor-wise, early, they're going to talk to you about being clumsy. They fall down a lot, they drop things a lot, they do things. So these are some of the things that you can come up with that, you know, if you've got somebody that's kind of in the back of your mind that you're thinking about it, that you can, you know, kind of start really watching, and they may not pick up what you're going at if you just say, well, you fall down a bunch, you know, you drop things. You know, they're not gonna, they may not put those things together with what you're kind of zoning in on to try to figure out if that's what they have. That then progresses to chorea, which is the actual movement part of it. It's interesting to watch. I haven't seen a lot of Huntington's, but in the ones that I've had, these people cannot sit still. You cannot make them sit still. And the more you try to make them sit still, the worse it gets. But it's really, and those are the things that you'll kind of see, it's dance-like. It affects all parts of their body, including their trunk, arms, legs, so it affects everything with regards to what's going on. And it's just that kind of, you know, wavy, you know, they're just all over the place from a standpoint of what's going on. A lot of flexion and extension, so that, you know, if they try to sit still, you know, they're constantly doing this, you know, as they're sitting there, because they, you know, their body just kind of flexes and extends. Their arms, you know, may fly all over the place and move around. Don't forget, you may get something that looks like this too, sometimes in people who have had group A strep infection after rheumatic fevers. So they don't have Huntington's disease, but they have Sydenham's chorea, so it's kind of right there with regards to what's going on. I think I have a slide in here on that. That then progresses from clumsiness to full movement disorder to finally at the end pretty much wheelchair bound and immobilization. They just get totally rigid where they don't move at all. So they really have immobility issues, so you know they'll progress to wheelchair status before they're done. This is what we were talking about earlier with regards to what you're looking at. A lot of flexion and extension, movement all over for the body. They cannot, if you ask them to put their hands out and hold their hand out like this, I mean, they can't hold it at all. I mean, they'll kind of hold it there for just a second and then one will drop or move or whatever. They can't do things over and over again. Have them stick their tongue out. So stick your tongue out for 3 seconds. If they make it for 1, you'll be surprised because they can't. They'll stick it out and then it just shoots right back in. They just can't. They can't do that kind of positional type stuff that's going on. Difficulty staying on tack. They don't concentrate very well. Eye movements. If you ask them to do range of motion on ice, I mean it's literally your hands going like this because it takes that long, and they're trying to move their head, so you literally have to hold their head from a standpoint to try to get them to move their eyes, and they're forcing and fighting with you from a standpoint of looking at their gaze, so their eye movement is extremely slow. Some of them will have trouble swallowing. Some of them will have some speech issues to the point where you can't even hardly understand what they're saying because of the disease itself. They're just awkward looking. I mean, you see them walk and do stuff because it's in the legs. You know, they're just kind of all over the place when they're walking if they look drunk. So those are the kind of things that we're looking at with their exams. The big thing here is these people need a lot of help. This is a fatal disease. They're going to die from it. They're going to have a lot of issues between now and then because of it. So getting everything set up as quickly as possible and getting them to referrals are going to be important. The thing is, though, is you've realized that a lot of these patients, particularly if you're in family medicine, you may take care of all their family, you may take care of everybody, so you may not be taking care of their disease, but you're still taking care of the patient. And so from that standpoint, you may be the first one to know if, they got in a fight down in Bar-Brawl the other day. From the standpoint, their neurologist that's in Oklahoma City has no idea what's going on, but you know that something's changing in their lifestyle, that you've got to kind of step in and see what you can do to kind of, guide them the right direction and make sure they have everything. I think the biggest thing is getting them in with social services as fast as possible. These people are, if anybody's ever filled out an SSI disability form, this is one that you can put in, slam dunk, and go. Other than ALS, I don't think I've ever seen anything go through SSI so fast. Because these people are going to lose their livelihood, they're going to lose their job, they're going to, require high medical costs, they're going to require everything with regards to what's going on. So having them start getting that stuff done early is better than, now they've lost their job and they're filling out SSI paperwork and they go 6 months without a paycheck. That's devastating not to them, but also to their family. So really getting these people going. Psychology, psychiatry, again, they have irrational behaviors, and sometimes working with a professional is going to help. So whether or not you want to go the whole mental route or medical route is up to you, but getting them in. Obviously getting them to a neurologist that's going to continue to follow them up, and talking with them, sitting down and talking with them about genetic counseling. Particularly if you're talking about somebody that you just diagnosed at the age of 35 who have 4 kids at home. They have to know what to expect and what's going on. And obviously it'll be up to their decision later on as to whether or not they want genetic counseling, but you at least are morally obligated to bring that up. There's no cure. It's a genetic mutation, so there's no genetic, there's no gene therapy yet that's going to help it. And the biggest thing is watching these patients, because they change so slowly, but so dramatically, is making sure that you're always kind of up on what's going on. So the use of some of the medications with regards to, these patients are going to be depressed. How could you not be depressed? They're insomniacs, they're OCD, they're impulsive, so using some of the medications that you utilize in those. Because it's a neurodegenerative disorder and because of the way it progresses, unlike using some of the dementia medications that we use for Alzheimer's or other dementias, it doesn't work very well. Some people have tried it, but it doesn't work. Tetrabenazine is the only FDA-approved medication. Black box warning, increased risk of depression and suicide. So now you have a patient who's already at increased risk of depression and suicide, and you're putting them on a medication that puts them at increased risk of depression and suicide. So it does slow the progression of this. It does calm the tremors down a little bit, but you just have to be careful. Use of typical and atypical antipsychotics have been out there. So there's not a center of excellence in Oklahoma, which I'm really kind of surprised, just because of the pockets that we see in Oklahoma. The closest one, Nebraska has one, Houston has one, but there are quite a few neurologists here in the city and in Tulsa that treat a big pocket of Huntington's patients. So, I think they have, I don't think they have to use the Center of Excellence as much, but certainly maybe with some of the, some of your Westfall patients or whatever, if you got a really young one, they may have more clinical trials, may have more access to some of those things that might give your patient a better quality of life for a little while. Okay, guess what? We're on the last one. And we're doing good on time. Parkinson's disease. Everybody knows who this is, right? Thanks. Muhammad Ali. Lots of different things related to Parkinson's disease, and we'll talk about this. Parkinson's disease itself is an actual disease, but Parkinsonisms, the exam or the findings that we see with Parkinson's disease has similar characteristics, but it's not actually the disease. So it's really hard, and it's actually, there was a study done in the UK that they did post-mortems on a bunch of patients that were seen around the UK, diagnosed with Parkinson's disease by neurologists, so not by primary care physicians, not by anything from a standpoint, but diagnosed with Parkinson's disease as a neurologist. And when they went in and actually did their postmortems and studied the brain and all this kind of stuff, substantia nigra was fine. So from that standpoint, it was like 40% were misdiagnosed. So there's a lot of diseases, there are a lot of conditions that'll give you Parkinsonisms, but not necessarily Parkinson's disease. So, you know, that's kind of something, because a lot of times Parkinson, if you just go right in the first time the patient comes in and they've got this little, you know, pill rolling tremor that you hear about all the time, and you just like bark up and say, oh, you have Parkinson's disease, it's kind of a, not a death sentence to the patient, but it's certainly kind of a, you know, big slap in the face to your patient. So, you know, watching them, following them, remembering that this is an extremely slow disorder that develops over time, and there's treatments and things for it. We try to be more, yeah, you have some characteristics of it, but we're not really sure if you had the disease or not, you know, just to kind of make them not be so hung up on the fact that, oh, I have Parkinson's disease. Kind of light, in the same light, these are some of the conditions that may kind of give you that scenario of Parkinson's disease. And really, multisystem atrophy was one of the most likely diagnosis that was missed, that was labeled as Parkinson's disease by the neurologists in the UK, that was actually MSA. The biggest thing that you can see in a Parkinson's patient, their reflexes are going to be either normal or actually depressed. Okay? In a multisystem atrophy patient, they're going to have upper motor neuron spikes. So you're going to get a positive Hoffman. You're going to get increased reflexes. You're going to get those things that you got taught in neuroanatomy with regards to upper motor neuron. Test those things. I mean, if you're looking for a neurologic disease with regards to like Parkinson's disease is, you better have done a good qualified neuro exam. Because if you've got upper motor neuron disease and somebody that you thought have Parkinson's disease and they don't have cord compression someplace, they don't have, you know, cervical stenosis or you know, from a standpoint, there might be something else that's going on in the brain that we need to image those patients and find out. You've got somebody really young that comes in with something that looks like Parkinson's disease. It doesn't usually occur in the really young people. So you better be imaging those patients and, you know, get them into your scanners and find out, is there something else that I'm missing, that it looks like Parkinson's disease, but it's not. All the other ones we really kind of talked about. Normal pressure hydrocephalus is just, you know, kind of generalized atrophy, and the patients get these huge ventricles, but the pressure in the brain doesn't go up. But they have other things that, you know, they may have tremors, they may have change in their attitude, but they'll all have urinary incontinence associated with it. Essential tremor we kind of talked about earlier. Huntington's disease, we talked about the tremor's totally different with regards. Lewy body dementia, we talked about. In Parkinson's disease, the cognitive part of Parkinson's disease takes a while. So you don't come in demented with Parkinson's disease. It doesn't happen that way. You may start to get dementia as the disease progresses, but you don't come in that way. If you come in fully demented, there's something else that's going on. Even if you have a pill-rolling tremor, there's probably something else that's going on. You need to find out what it is. Wilson's disease has a tremor a lot of times that looks a lot like it. Remember, Wilson's is a copper accumulation. You don't see it as much anymore, but remember the whole Kaiser-Fleischer rings. These patients come in psychotic, and Parkinson's patients aren't psychotic usually. Unless you put them on the wrong medicine, and medicines cause psychosis, they're not typically psychotic. Encephalopathy, obviously, if they've had a recent infection, you've got to look at the fact of, you know, did that infection turn into a meningitis, into an encephalopathy, do we have a brain? And then have medicines caused it. I use, because of surgery, I use Phenergan, Compazine, metoclopramide, Revlan, We use those type of medications, scopolamine. We use those types of medications all the time because these patients coming out of surgery and stuff are nausea and vomiting is huge. Reglan works great. It's a great medicine to kind of calm down nausea and vomiting, particularly after an anterior spine surgery, with regards to what's going on. But you'll see a lot of those patients will start to get tremor with it. The bad part about it is if you don't stop the drug, tremor. If you don't stop the drug right away, the tremor is permanent. So, you know, reminding patients and looking at the medications, it's like, oh, you take Phenergan. How long have you taken that for? You know, and they tell you that they've taken Phenergan for the last year every day because they have this chronic nausea that never goes away, but nobody can find anything wrong. Maybe some of that's coming from a standpoint of the medication. So watch your meds. This is in the substantia nigra. Again, you know, kind of similar areas and stuff, but what we find is that it's a dopamine loss in the brain. So when you look at a brain tissue from a standpoint, the good thing is the substantia nigra is got black neurons that go through it. So it's very easy to see microscopically and easy to see. They actually have scanners now that will actually look at dopamine uptake of the brain. They don't use them very often for diagnosis of Parkinson's disease just because it's an expensive test and if you really want to. But sometimes in your younger population that you get an MRI, the MRI looks okay. I don't see a lesion in there. I don't see a big old mass in there that's causing this effect. I don't see a lot of atrophy. Is there something else going on? Sometimes you can throw them into a DT scanner and see how they're doing and see what's going on. But you can see on one side, you know, you can see that fine line of where the substantia nigra is, and on the Parkinson's patients, that line where the substantia nigra is gone. So the dopamine uptake's gone. Progressive neurodegenerative, 160 out of 100,000. So I mean, you know, incidence is probably in your geriatric population. If you take a lot of care of a lot of geriatric patients, you'll probably see it. Sometimes you'll see it in family medicine. But certainly if you take care of the older the patients that you get, the more likelihood that you'll see it. Onset's usually around 60. It usually progresses over the next 10 to 20 years that you'll see a progression of it. Men are more frequent than women, but we're seeing a lot of women. I actually had quite a few female veterans in the VA that were Parkinson's. Now, some of those were also deployed and elsewhere from standpoint, so we weren't sure if it was actually, you know, a true Parkinson's disease or whether or not they had been exposed to chemicals or been exposed to things that have then, you know, increased their risks of developing Parkinson's syndromes since then. The UK probably does Parkinson's better than just about anybody out there. They're the ones that initially defined it, and they're the ones that have probably some of the best centers for Parkinson's. Number one, bradykinesia. They're slow. They're extremely slow. Getting up, getting moving, getting walking, anything that they do. So writing things, brushing their teeth, you know, anything from a standpoint is just kind of this, oh good God, please hurry up, you know, kind of focus. Then they have to have at least one of the other three. The tremor is absent in about 25 to 30% of patients. So, you know, you'll think, you know, Parkinson's disease, pin rolling tremor, you're not going to see it a lot of times in these patients. So you have to watch other things with regards to what's going on. The rigidity is usually there. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about physical exam. Instability. So these patients, you know, as you get them to kind of stand and you're kind of moving them around and stuff, they don't compensate for movement like other people do. So we have to kind of watch with regards to that. And then at least three of these, unilateral onset starts on one side, it's progressive. One side is always worse than the other side, so even if it goes to the other side, if they start having symptoms or tremor or whatever in the other side, there's always one that's there. Response to dopamine. If I give them dopamine, does it get better? Well, if it does, then chances are they probably have a lack of dopamine and that's what's causing it. The other point of that is if I give them dopamine and they get better, if I give them too much dopamine, do they get worse? And the answer to that will also kind of help. I don't know how many people, Michael J. Fox is kind of getting even out of style at the moment. You don't see him as much. But when he first got diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and he would do a lot of lectures and things from a standpoint of what was going on, he would come up and he would always have these like crazy movements as he was up doing all of his lectures. And everybody's like, oh my God, Parkinson's is so bad. It wasn't his Parkinson's that was causing that. It was because he was consuming so much Sinemet that was causing that. So that's the kind of, you know, if you get too much dopamine, now you get almost a chorea, you know, almost this, you know, crazy movement. So people were displaying over the fact that, you know, all of this wild movement that he had was, you know, this is an awful, awful, awful disease, and it wasn't that at all. It was the medication that he was doing, but it made a lot for show, and it brought a lot of money in for the Parkinson's Society. So from that standpoint, you know, he kept doing that for a while. He doesn't do it as much anymore. He looks pretty Parkinson's now. Clinical course, usually over about 10 years. So, you know, if you got somebody that's starting this in their mid-60s or early 70s, you know, it's going to feel fairly slow as to what's going on with these patients. Talked about a little bit about this earlier. Remember, primary disease is actual Parkinson's disease, where they lose the dopamine in the brain into the substantia nigra. But there are also a lot of things that can cause it, and we talked about that as far as medications can cause it. A lot of the antipsychotics, which are dopamine depleting medicines, you know, can cause symptoms that are associated with it. The treatment for Huntington's disease can cause Parkinson's, you know, can cause Parkinsonism. So when you look at that, you know, you're just kind of, again, trading off one thing for another. You have this crazy Huntington's person who's like jostling all over the place, and then you give them medication for that, and it turns them into kind of this walking Parkinson's zombie. So it's kind of a give and take on what you really want to look at. Became really popular, I don't remember, I think when was that, 70s? With all the MPTP in California. Yeah. It's a synthetic opiate that people were making in their garages, kind of like we all make now with meth. But there were, you know, pockets of these people who were having Parkinson's-like symptoms in California, and they couldn't figure out where it was coming from. And later on, they found out that it was caused by this synthetic opiate that was out there for the longest time. Multi-infarct dementia, obviously, or multi-infarcts, obviously, you know, you start having a patient who's throwing a bunch of, you know, TIAs and a bunch of strokes everywhere. If you stroke out enough areas in the brain, you're going to get, you know, symptoms that are very similar to what's going on. And probably one of the biggest ones that we're hearing about now is going to be kind of that post-traumatic. So the boxers that are coming down with it. And I don't know, has anybody seen Concussion with Will Smith? I mean, that movie is amazingly good. I mean, before you go into practice, before you see from a standpoint that you see athletes and you start seeing all these kids who have concussions and they want to be in the football game, the next football game that's out there because, you know, God, I'm going to make a scholarship and I'm going to play professional. You know, now they're at 7 concussions and they're, you know, 16. Watch that movie. I mean, it's incredible on how well they did that movie with regards to, you know, what the football players and stuff are seeing now, and what's happening out there. So from that, it's going to have probably way more exposure in the next probably 20 years, as you know, the whole lawsuit against the NFL and all that kind of stuff just keeps growing and things keep going from there. But watch that watch it in your kiddos. You know, be there to support the family when the family makes the decision that says, you know, look, my kid's not playing anymore. You know, I'm taking him out, and the kid's rebelling and throwing a fit with regards to what's going on. You know, give him a copy of Concussion and have him go home and watch it. I mean, and see what happens 20 years later after they have all that brain trauma with regards to what's going on. So it's there. Early symptoms, patients come in, damn, they're tired all the time. They're tired all the time because they can't sleep. They also lose their smell. Nobody really kind of knows why, but smell is kind of the first thing to go. Food doesn't taste good anymore, it'll be the first thing that you hear from them. And you go, well, what do you mean it doesn't taste good? I don't know, I don't think my taste buds are working anymore. Food doesn't taste good. I said, well, can you smell the food? No. Okay, so they don't think about it from a standpoint that, you know, what, 90% of taste is smell? So, they don't think about those kind of things, so watch it. They get a lot of leg cramps in the middle of the night, they get a lot of restless leg syndrome, they get a lot of foot cramps. A lot of things happen with regards to what's going on, but mostly they start to know, and their spouse, if they're married, of course, is gonna, or their family, are gonna start hiding things. So, they may have their checkbook taken away. They won't tell you that they had their checkbook taken away, but they may have it taken away because they go and write checks, but they don't look to see how much money's in the account, and, they overdraw and they do these things. So the things that they normally did around the house that was kind of their responsibility, their spouse kind of starts taking over that responsibility and does it very quietly, so that, most of the family members aren't gonna know, or you may not even know because they do it. But a lot of times what happens is I'd have a lot of my patients that would get up because they'd have to go pee or something, or they'd leave, and boy, the earful that you would get once they walked out of the room by the family members just, filling them in on everything else that's going on. So don't forget about the support of what's going on around them. If you're asking them a question and, they go, oh yeah, no, it's not a problem whatsoever, keep one eye sitting on the spouse to kind of see whether the spouse is going, yeah, right, kind of thing, because you can get an idea a lot of times what's happening, even if your patient's not telling you the truth, or the family members that are sitting in the room are trying to tell you just very casually with just the look on their face. Sometimes vocally, but mostly just very casually. Cardinal features, these are things that you're going to see on tests. Again, ocular motions, range of motion, extremely slow. Dull, they've got a positive dull size. Myerson sign, sit here and tap them here, okay? I can sit here and do this forever and not blink. They can't. You start tapping boy, they're just, their eyes are just blinking like crazy. Rapid alternating movements, so finger tapping, pronation, so, supination, those type of things. It'll start out okay, but then the next thing you know, it's like, barely moving. Mass facies, that's probably the biggest one you see. I mean, these are the people that you walk in and it's like, no matter what you say or what you do, they have this stark look on their face. I mean, they never change it. They don't smile, their eyes don't glow, it's just like you're looking at somebody going, are you there? Are you hearing me? Do you hear what I'm saying? So you see that a lot. Sit to stand, one of the biggest tests with regards to these patients. So, when we sit and stand, we don't really need anything. These patients cannot, if you have them sit and cross their arms and say, okay, stand up, it takes them a very long time if they can even do it at all. I mean, it's very difficult for them to just be able to stand with regards to, it's a good thing. Arm swing, have them take a walk down the hall as we're going through. As we walk, our arms just kind of move with us when we walk. Theirs don't. I mean, they walk and they're, like this, their arms aren't doing the block turning when you ask them to turn around and come back. Instead of us just turning around and coming back, they literally, turn it from a standpoint of turning like they're turning in a block. So watch, just, doing a good exam and watching these people do things, having them write for you, have them write a paragraph as you're sitting there talking to them standpoint, have them just, have a set paragraph that you do in the office and have them write it. And what happens is the longer that they write, the smaller that it gets. So as they, and that'll progress as they go through from a standpoint, so if you keep that one and then you test them again 6 months later, it's probably going to show a difference. But their writing will get so tiny that you can barely even see it. The other thing is look at if there's a family member there with you, a child or a sibling or whatever that lives someplace that you don't talk to them normally, but you talk to them over the phone. Ask them, can you hear them when you call them? Because when they talk over the phone, most of these patients, the family members will say, you can't ever hear what they're saying. So you have no idea what's going on. Tremor, like I said, it's absent in about 25% of the patients. It's a pin rolling tremor, okay? So it's something that you will see on boards with regards to it, that they'll talk about this pin rolling tremor. It's just this very faint, very slow tremor that a lot of times you don't even see. It occurs at rest. So unlike essential tremor that occurs with movement, this occurs with rest. So you don't even have to really acknowledge it other than the entire time that you're sitting there talking to the patient and they've got their hands in their lap, watch and see what they're doing with regards to that will usually catch it because it's such a low frequency, low amplitude, it's really hard to see. The other thing with these patients is when you go to do a Romberg test on a patient that, you've got a patient standing in front of you and you kind of pull them back, usually we'll correct ourselves and we'll go from that standpoint. These guys will just go backwards. I mean, you literally, if you go to pull on them to check for postural instability, be ready to catch them because they will end up in your lap if you're not there ready to support them and see what's going on. Rigidity is also a thing from a standpoint of what you need to do. So taking these patients and rolling their head around, as you're rolling their head around, get them to kind of tap their fingers over here, and you'll actually bring that rigidity out, where you'll feel like you literally feel like you're going to break their neck as you're trying to move things around. Same way with elbows, inflection and extension, most importantly in the wrist. The wrist is going to give you what we call cogwheel rigidity. So if you get them to distract somehow, to not pay attention to what you're doing, and you're just rotating their wrist around, all of a sudden now you'll feel that ratchet of a cogwheel. So it feels like as you're moving that wrist around that it's just kind of snapping as it goes. And that's an area that you want to watch for, particularly when you start looking at medications and stuff too. We talked about that. Their gait, remember, initially will just be kind of a slow arm swing, maybe a little slow, but they don't really get that shuffling gait that you hear about with Parkinson's disease until a little later on down the road. So that kind of comes with things. Also the freezing that we see a lot, the on and off that we see a lot with Parkinson's disease, again, that's another one that's going to come a little bit later. So, those are as the disease advances. Hopefully, we've gotten them started on right medications, we've diagnosed it ahead of time, we've gotten them on kind of right medications that we lose a lot of that stuff. We don't see it, okay? Because we've done the right thing. Dementia, way later stages. These people don't come in demented. They come in with maybe a little slowness in thought, but they don't come in with dementia. Dementia doesn't occur until much later. But I always suggest, because it's so slow and progressive, doing a mini mental status every time they come in. Because what that does is at least lets you know when that starts to change, so that when that starts to change, you can get them into the right social services, into the right places, into the right things, the right referrals that you need to do. Don't let it get to the point where all of a sudden now they have profound dementia because you didn't catch the early stages of that. So watch out for that. Imaging, we kind of talked about this before, not really needed. You don't really need it. Now, if it's a young person and you think that they have something that's going on and you can't really pin down from your neurologic exam on what you think it is, then an MRI is probably a good idea. Just from a standpoint, and it says get a CT or MRI, if you get a CT and something looks abnormal, you're going to get an MRI, so you might as well get an MRI. But get some studies, because it may be a tumor, it may be something else that's going on that you need to figure out faster, so don't just ignore it and see what's happening on these younger patients. They do have a DAT scan, like I said before. It's a SPECT scan that actually looks for dopamine uptake in the brain. So it can come through, but most of that are at the bigger centers. They're not, it's not like you can, order one from Oklahoma Diagnostic. It's kind of the bigger centers, so from there we should be okay. Treatment-wise, early, it's a good thing with these patients to get them doing things. We talked about the fact that they have they can have hypophonia where their voices are really low and stuff. So getting them in to see a speech therapist, getting devices to put on their phone so that, their voices are more projected, those things are all available. So instead of the fact of, well, no, I never get to talk to my dad anymore because I can't hear him on the phone, well, figure out what you need to do or what you need to do to help your patient to make sure that they can keep up with their family and they can keep things doing what they're supposed to do. Physical therapy, remember they're really slow, they're going to get a little weaker, things are going to happen from there. So a lot of these people do really well with cold therapies. So aquatic therapies and stuff, we've gotten into a lot of patients with regards, and it kind of just kept their lifestyle a little better. So from there, obviously we have medications to treat Parkinson's disease, we'll talk more about that later, and surgery too. Again, deep brain stimulation is something that's used quite a bit now, so it's something that we do. Treatment is controversial, and it's controversial because if you have a depletion of dopamine in the brain and the disease is caused by that, well then give them dopamine. I mean, you know, if I give them dopamine and they have access to dopamine, then the symptoms aren't going to be there. But what we find is the fact that, like everything else, wears out fairly quickly. So the sooner I start them on dopamine, the less likelihood that as the progression of this disease goes 20 years later, that in the next 5 to 10 years, dopamine's not going to work anymore. And then the symptoms, you know, they're like, well, I did great for the longest time, why can't I do it now? So sometimes trying to start some of these patients on some other kinds of medications other than just straight to dopamine can get them that quality of life longer before you have to start the dopamine, so that the dopamine then doesn't run out and it doesn't become not effective for you. But when you're looking at these medications, whether it be, you know, Artane, Cogentin, all of these medications all have pretty nasty side effects with them with regards to the fact of the anticholinergic. So constipation, dry mouth, orthostatic hypotension, all those kind of stuff that you see all the time. So, you know, you can start these patients on this, but remember from that, you know, if they're older and we're at risk of all this stuff anyway, then it's going to make things worse. So you just kind of have to weigh the good and the bad with regards to what you're using for treatment. Obviously, the biggest treatment of this is going to be dopamine. It's a loss of dopamine, so give them dopamine. Well, dopamine doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier, but levodopa does. So we know from a standpoint using levodopa that we can get it to cross the blood-brain barrier so that we can get effect to it. The bad part is levodopa makes you sick as a dog. I mean, vomiting, profuse vomiting with just it. So when they added carbidopa to it, what they found out is that reduced the side effects and the nausea side effects of the levodopa. So from there, they were able to utilize it at higher dosages, be able to do it a lot faster with regards to what's going on. But like I said before, if you start it too soon, if you just jump straight to dopamine, it's going to get to a point where it doesn't work for you. So use it when you feel like the patient needs it, and that we can't control the symptoms other ways, so be careful. And then also don't forget, if they get too much, which they will like to take too much a lot, because it kind of gives them a jump start and gets them going. And so they really kind of enjoy this medicine, and you'll find a lot of them just carry it around in their pockets. And you know, they pop it whenever they want, which doesn't help you because they're going to deplete it, their abilities to be able to use it a lot faster when they do this. But if they start getting a lot of dyskinesia or a lot of strange movement, they're taking it too much. They need to stop. They need to slow it down. Dopamine agonists, usually used when Sinemet starts, that it's not it's not working as good anymore. What are we gonna do as typical providers? We're just gonna add another drug. So these drugs are a lot of times used mostly in kind of an adjuvant to it, so it's not working as good anymore, we're gonna put it in. COM2 inhibitors are also used as an adjuvant. Dopamine breaks down, and when it degrades, that's what gives us the side effects. That also what makes it not last as long. So we don't get as an effect to it because of the breakdown. It's broken down by this transferase COMT. It's what breaks it down. So if we use a COMT inhibitor, we can inhibit that enzyme, which will then inhibit the breakdown of the drug, which then will hopefully get the drug to last a little longer. So it doesn't treat, those drugs, don't use them as a first line of something because it doesn't do anything to treat the disease. It just treats the drug that you're giving them to try to make it last a little bit longer for them. Monoamine oxidase inhibitors, again, prolongs the life of dopamine in the bloodstream and in the brain. Lots of side effects with monoamine oxidase inhibitors, particularly with other drugs that they're taking. So watch all the medicines that they're on to make sure that we're not having some effect with those. A lot of these drugs, a lot of the dopamine drugs that we use will actually cause a psychosis. So treated in high enough dosages, the patients may start having some hallucinations, they may start seeing things, they may, have some problems with it. So you may have to add something like Seroquel or some of the other medications to kind of help treat the psychosis and just what the medications are causing. So as usual, you give them one thing and you cause something else. So be careful with what you're actually causing to the patient. Again, initially surgery, stereotaxically, or surgery from a standpoint, they used to do pallidotomies. Actually, Michael J. Fox had a pallidotomy then. It's usually done on one side, but again, because of that area that it's done, we have to watch for their ability for visual spatial recognition. We have to watch for their abilities for speech issues because of the location in the brain that we're working on. So from that, it's not used as much anymore, particularly since deep brain stimulation has kind of gotten its way in. Deep brain stimulators put into the subthalamic nucleus or the globus pallidus, usually subthalamic nucleus, again, thought to excite the inhibitory pathway so that we can actually control some of the symptoms. Just like, maybe not quite as dramatic as essential tremor, because essential tremor, the tremor is so dramatic, and watching when you turn it on and off, watching that change is so crazy. It's not as much, but boy, these patients tend to, with deep brain stimulator, tend to really slow the progression of the disease. A lot of them, I had them off completely off of Sinemet, so we didn't have to have them on Sinemet at all, which means that later on, when the deep brain stimulator wasn't working, then we were able to add Sinemet to it then, and so we were able to get their quality of life. We have patients coming in at 85, 90 years old that, we're still doing just fine and have been diagnosed since 50. And their quality of life was still really good. So, using it as initially kind of, medication initially, the medication doesn't work, go to kind of a thought of a deep brain stimulation, which may be able to take off of medications after that, to then hopefully once that starts to getting some refractoriness to the surgery itself, then being able to come back in and add medications back to it and get the patient back to the point where you can get them and kind of maintain their quality of life. What's up? Again, just like everything else, lots of foundations. Parkinson's does a bunch. So you'll always see, walks and everything with regards to Parkinson's. You'll see it quite a bit. There's, like I said, there are centers both here in the city and in Tulsa. So from that standpoint, a lot of places that you can send patients to do it. But don't forget, they're going to probably see that provider once every maybe 6 months to a year. They may be seeing you every month because they're coming in for something else. So you still may be that first line provider that sees changes that are occurring up that you may then either have to talk to the patient about or pick up the phone and call the neurologist and say, hey, I just saw so-and-so today and this is what's going on. Is it something I need to worry about? So even though you may not be treating it directly, you may be the first line person that's seeing it more often than anything else. So, ta-da. Movement disorders in 2 hours or less. Any questions? Please send it.